An interest of my work is taking the archaic myths and linking them to contemporary figures, such as Juice WRLD or XXXTentacion. Hello, my name is Samuel Abelow. I'm a multimedia artist living in the United States. I have been studying world myths with the lens of archetypes for many years now. My art practice corresponds with my own Jungian analysis. An interest of my work is taking the archaic myths and linking them to contemporary figures, such as Juice WRLD or XXXTentacion, Soundcloud Rappers. And these larger-than-life characters, charismatic, hyper-creative, talented, are also relevant towards many of us. This Orpheus.
So before I get, specifically into what Orpheus is all about, I thought I might just explain what I mean by Orpheus and by archetypes anyhow. I'm using Orpheus here as a sort of general term for the poet, artist, singer, in the way that archetypes are patterns of behavior that have existed for thousands of years and sort of summarize a general set of behaviors and activities that many people are prone to. And those patterns are expressed in the specific myths or stories in a given culture. And we will get into some of that. But I'm just sort of speaking generally about how this poet-artist is active in us today, using the term Orpheus in a poetic way.
This Orpheus, when active in a male personality, is the source of intense longings, a longing that's for the divine and yet can be chaotic, carnal, sensual, hyper-creative, as I mentioned, expressive, dynamic. And this intensity can often lead to so much suffering and depression. So especially to those young men out there who love music and they have such a deep creativity and expressiveness, but find themselves with entanglements with depressive women or in depressive moods themselves, they find that their creativity often comes from a confusing suffering and feelings of bewilderment, and especially an aversion to the practical real world, a sense of being aloof and either on the one hand hyper-spiritual and cosmic, astral, and on the other hand, either involved in drugs or other behaviors that seem to leave one feeling empty. This video may be helpful for you to become aware of the landscape both historically and in the archaic psyche and what that means for us today. I have here in my notes just like a little bit about the backdrop of this archetype, because I think it's important to understand, even if it's a little bit academic. For example, in this paper that I found and is in my archive of notes, it's just a paper called The Greco-Roman World of the New Testament Era, exploring the background of early Christianity. So that's a sidebar, and I actually had just done a video about how Christianity and the theme of Jesus actually contains earlier archetypes from a pagan backdrop. And I think that is actually very compelling when you look at Juice WRLD and his Christianity. And so to understand more of this archaic past informs what we're attracted to in our imagination today. And really what I'm getting to is we live an imaginative life. We imagine who we are and what our identity is and what images and themes are meaningful to us. And if we can imagine and create a more informed life, therefore more conscious life, we can have healthier outcomes and communally and collectively grow rather than disintegrating and seeing great talent arise and fall. So Jeffers notes that the Orphics were worshippers of Dionysus, but they weren't wild like some of the other worshippers of Dionysus. They were known for what was sometimes referred to as an Orphic life, which included vegetarianism and purification. The Orphic mystery religion of Greece began in Thrace as the orgiastic cult of Dionysus. It toned down the more savage elements of the earlier religion and added sacred literature, and offered salvation through personal purification and secret ceremonies. The religion was strongly dualist, teaching that the soul is imprisoned in the body and must be released from the body's corrupting influences. It espoused the belief that the soul can become purer through repeated incarnations. This is from Laws Book 6 by Plato. Just want to note here, as per my previous essay on the Soundcloud Rappers and the archetype of the poet-artist, Orpheus and Dionysus are very closely linked, and although Orpheus is more toned towards this sort of spiritual purism and loftiness, and Dionysus is a bit more animal, a poet-artist tends to move between the two quite readily, depending on their mood state or circumstances. In Plato's work here, it says there were no animal sacrifices, but only cakes and fruits dipped in honey and similar pure offerings. So it's said that these men lived a sort of Orphic life, having the use of all lifeless things, but abstaining from all living things. Longing for this very pure and cosmic, ungrounded, unearthly spirituality creates a tension between spirituality and sexuality. That's what's meant by the concept of dualism. Like it's one or the other, there's a split. I think this is very common because Christianity has a lot of these elements of the split. Some people call it the head and the body. That to be in heaven, to be accepted into heaven, you have to be sort of like perfectly pure, and a priest doesn't have a relationship of any sort. And what that creates is a repression of the animal side. And for a historic example, and you can find this in David Sweetman's book on Paul Gauguin called A Life, and there's also an exhibition that was held at the Guggenheim Museum about a French group, but I'm going to say it in English, called the Salon of the Rose Cross. This was in 19th century France, particularly in Paris, intensely lofty art circles that excluded women and were influenced by sort of bizarre spiritualism, what we now call New Ageism today. The misogyny throughout the works featured either a reduced image of a femme fatale, meaning like the woman who destroys this sort of like pure and higher intellect of the man, like sort of debasing this pure image of a man with his intellect who's above life. And this was linked to syphilis, which was very common at the time, and there was no cure for it. But it's also a larger theme of just sort of the femme fatale, the man who experiences women as sort of his downfall, her emotionality, or her as experienced as a deathliness. And it's not reflective of women. Misogyny is reflective of a man's inability to relate to the feminine archetype and his own hyper-emotionality and drama that he experiences when interacting with women. He's the one who's so dramatic, you see. And on the other hand, in the Salon de Rose Cross from the Femme Fatale, they had the ethereal angel. She's not even an embodied, a disembodied, angelic, spiritual female figure. And it simply represents this clear split or division in the man between spirituality and sensuality. What happens in the Salon de Rose Cross is the leader is this almost like guru guy, and the association of the emphasis of the beauty and the superiority of the intellect is connected to a homosexuality, which is like a love for man and fellow man as a sort of superior intellectual form. And it's this beauty which is a philosophical beauty, a sort of aesthetic which the Salon of the Rose Cross emphasized. Paul Gauguin obviously rejected that whole tact, but that's for another day. So welcome to at least one part of my painting studio here. I found this essay, this academic essay called Orpheus and Eurydice, A Creative Agony by Beverley Zabriskie, very informative at the time of developing this work. And I'd like to just look at some quotes today with you. In the myth, Orpheus is supposed to get married to Eurydice and have this beautiful life together. But on the day of their wedding, she steps on a snake, gets abducted into the underworld. But Zabriskie looks at this analytically and comes to the conclusion that Eurydice, Orpheus' wife, couldn't be fully embodied. She says, in creative work, the intensity of internal conception are never realized enough to make them fully perceptible in the world. And this is very common with creative types, right? Where the creativity is endless, but the consistency or the discipline to bring that into something concrete and stable and lasting is not there. And she's saying this is associated with an Eurydice feminine side, which can't fully be embodied. There are always potentials to be actualized, she says, conceptions to be realized in the future. Paradoxically, each venture into incarnated reality brings a felt and suffered sense of separate confinement apart from the soul's boundlessness. I think this is really key because at the feminine side of the Orphic man, so to speak, this poet artist, feels as if regular life is a confinement to his boundlessness and his spirituality. Therefore, this feminine moodiness, his anima's moodiness, drives him to create these dramas and therefore tragedies even. And we can see this in both Juice WRLD's and XXXTentacion's life, respectively. For Juice, I think it was that, I mean, he does talk in songs about his desire to be with his one woman, but he was so he has this theme of being hurt by women, that every time he gives his heart, he gets hurt. And I think on a deeper level than that is the drugs. The drugs are this boundless state, this nebulous state, and that moodiness and that pain, which is so intoxicating for him and so creative for him, is something that he can't just put aside and settle down. As much as he longs for it and has an intuition that that might be a healing path, his creativity and his lifestyle, his living fast, continually take back the front seat. They drive the ship. They're the plane that is being driven against his volition. And I think for XXXTentacion, it's very dramatic. This intense drama where he feels that he has a spiritual purpose in this life, and then paradoxically can't confine himself to a set of standards or a set of behaviors that would make life comfortable or safe. And psychologically, it reasons that his final interaction is with someone who's robbing him at gunpoint, and he resists. And in that resistance, he can't give up that defiant, aggressive, and very violent side to him. Zabriskie continues saying, having been among the dead, Orpheus had never fully returned. His lingering in ongoing grief kept both lovers suspended between life and death. Suspended between life and death. I think this is the central theme. He wants to save, he wants to live, he wants to sing his ethereal songs, but his fascination with death, his fascination with intoxication or violence is his downfall, his pull back into the underworld. She says, when individuals identify their entire being with the intensity of an instant, the breakthrough of a mood, or the clashes of a specific conflict, does a myth suggest an entire biography. Then the figures of myth assume inappropriate right of place and lord it over a psyche. In other words, as the individual man, the poet, artist, feels as if he is this role, and he's swept away by these conflicts of his pain and his love for drugs and intoxication, and how conflicted he is. The patterns of the myth assume a sort of dominant role over the personality, and she uses the phrase lord over the psyche or personality. The myth lords over the personality. I'll return to this later. How can one become their own lord? That is, to have autonomy and directedness in the personality. So that hints at the solution here. But I just want to note, as per my essay on the subject, that with XXXTentacion, for example, his early traumas surrounding the mother, that is to his feminine side, creates both this fascination with aesthetic and beauty and loving feelings, and even a sort of sensuality or sexuality that's very potent, and this ability to be inspired and creative and like just see things in an innovative way, in a very like soulfully inspired way, to see things anew and childlike. But the early trauma, having something healthful and stable and consistent feels like limiting. Have this aversion to goodness and healthfulness and being fully incarnated and stable. This is what the previous essayist was referring to with sort of resisting being bound. Having something healthful and stable and consistent feels like limiting. Therefore, he surrounds himself with demonic, quote, friends, or a stylization that seems depressive and demonic-like, or demon-like. And he will seek out or unconsciously find himself in relationships with a woman who's sort of witchy or witch-like. And it's that drama that he sort of needs, or is so deep in his structures that it's like he can't separate from that and say, I want something healthful, I want something grounded. He's torn apart from that. No, like that would limit me, that would constrain me, that would destroy my creativity. I see myself as this demonic character. And then yet that's the depressive feeling. I can't have something that would relax and fulfill and nourish me on a essential and basic level. Just like to say that as much as I'm psychoanalyzing these individuals, I'm doing it for the purpose of us gaining some insight today and growing together. And I honor that their creative contributions were substantial and important, and that their beauty and individuality will live on and is important to me, despite their shortcomings, trauma, and pain. Back up to the my upstairs room here, my personal quarters, my study. I just want to offer like a little bit more on the way out, or the way to integrate this. I don't have any 7-week program. There's no personal coaching package that I'm offering. For me, this is about giving back the opportunity I had to study and work with this material for a number of years. And the privilege I have to be an artist in this way allows me time to really work through these images and what they mean and research. And I just want to share that with audiences and connect to you. And so I don't have any complete answers, but what I can offer is a little bit of insight into what is beyond being just another Orphic man in the 27 Club. And I don't mean that as a pejorative against the legacy of some of the great artists who've contributed to our culture, but just as a warning against those with us today. And the primary thing here is namely the integration of other aspects of the personality. To be more specific, I would say that the number one archetype to look into is the archetype of the king. So for me, that might be King David, or King Solomon, or the stories of my ancestors as a Jewish man. But the king archetype has many variations throughout all cultures. And when you look at the king archetype, it's something centering. The king has a view of his domain, of the different elements. The king has a view, an overview of the different activities going on in the kingdom, which represents the personality, and he can organize that around a central perspective.
So thank you for listening. And what I'm gonna do for those who are interested is have a separate video where I get into a bit more depth with further insights on, how to develop the personality from this Orphic type. And that will include relationship to transcendence and the development of the feminine side, that is, an understanding of the qualities of the feminine within a man.
And definitely click subscribe if you found this useful, and thanks for listening.